The moment Deen picked the wrong target. Jalen Carter was not supposed to become the next viral victim of a street streamer. He was supposed to be walking through his day like any other NFL star trying to stay out of the noise. But one camera, one confrontation, and one reckless assumption turned a simple public encounter into a storm that neither side could control. Deen the Great built his reputation by walking up to people, testing their patience, and turning awkward tension into content. Most people either laugh, walk away, or freeze because they know the camera is already rolling. But this time, Deen was not standing in front of some random stranger. He was standing in front of Jalen Carter, a Philadelphia Eagles defensive tackle built like a moving wall and known across the NFL as one of the last people you want to disrespect face-to-face. The clip spread fast because it had everything the internet loves: surprise, tension, confusion, and one uncomfortable question. Did Deen really get the better of an NFL star on camera? For a few hours, that was the story. Fans clipped it, reposted it, added captions, and turned the moment into a punchline. Deen appeared to walk away with the viral win, while Carter looked like the man who had been caught off guard. But then came the twist. Deen went back online and said he thought Carter was a Fed. Not a Pro Bowl defensive tackle. Not a Super Bowl champion. Not one of the most disruptive young players in the league. A Fed. That explanation made the whole situation even bigger, because it suggested Deen had no idea who he was pushing. And that is where the mood changed. Because football fans knew something streaming fans were about to learn the hard way. Jalen Carter is not known for letting disrespect sit unanswered. On the field, his job is to apply pressure. Off the field, his reputation says he responds when he feels tested. So the question was no longer whether Deen had embarrassed Carter. The real question became much more dangerous. What happens when Jalen Carter decides he wants the last word? Before we go deeper, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. If you think Deen went too far, press 1. If you think Carter should have ignored it, press 2. And if you follow NFL drama, hit subscribe, because this story only gets heavier from here. The streamer who turns pressure into content. Deen the Great did not accidentally fall into this situation. His entire online identity is built around pressure. He approaches people, pushes the conversation into uncomfortable territory, and waits for a reaction strong enough to become a viral moment. That formula works because it feels unpredictable. Viewers never know whether the person across from him will laugh, argue, walk away, or explode. That unpredictability is the business model. Deen understands that the internet rewards tension faster than it rewards respect. A calm conversation disappears. A heated exchange travels. A person losing patience on camera becomes a clip. A clip becomes a headline. A headline becomes attention. And in the attention economy, attention is currency. But there is a hidden risk inside that formula. Every time Deen walks up to someone and tests their pride, he is gambling that the person on the other side values restraint more than reaction. Most people do. They understand that cameras change everything. They know one bad moment can follow them forever. But Deen has also made a habit of stepping into rooms with people who do not always respond like regular people. That is why this Jalen Carter encounter struck a nerve. Carter is not just famous. He is trained, paid, and celebrated for being aggressive inside controlled chaos. Every Sunday, he lines up against massive offensive linemen and tries to break through them. He does not play a gentle position. His game is leverage, force, timing, and intimidation. He survives in the NFL trenches by making other grown men uncomfortable. Deen may not have known all of that in the moment. He later claimed he thought Carter was law enforcement, which made people laugh, but it also exposed the central mistake. He did not recognize the type of person standing in front of him. He treated Carter like another character in a live stream instead of a professional athlete with a public reputation and a platform large enough to flip the story. That mistake changed everything, because once the internet connected the face to the name, the clip stopped being about Deen's confidence. It became about Deen's judgment. Jalen Carter's reputation was already loaded. To understand why people immediately waited for Carter's response, you have to understand the reputation he already carried. Jalen Carter is not viewed around the league as quiet background noise. He is one of those players whose talent is impossible to ignore and whose intensity follows him everywhere. On the field, he has become one of Philadelphia's most feared defensive pieces. His power jumps off the screen. His first step is violent, his hands are heavy, and his ability to collapse a pocket can change an entire drive before the quarterback even understands what happened. That kind of talent gives a player status. But Carter's story has never been only about talent. His name has also been connected to emotional flashpoints, heated exchanges, and moments where control became the storyline. Fans have seen him in confrontations, heard about fines, watched debates about his temper, and listened as analysts asked whether his fire is an asset or a liability. That is what makes him so fascinating and so complicated. He is not simply a star, he is a star with edges. And those edges matter in this story. Because if Deen had done this to a more polished media personality, maybe the clip would fade. Maybe the athlete would laugh it off, let the PR team handle it, and refuse to give the streamer extra attention. But Carter has never looked like the type to let someone else control the final version of a story about him. That is why the viral framing hit so hard. The internet was not just saying Deen talked to Carter, it was saying Deen embarrassed him. That word changes the temperature. In sports culture, embarrassment is not a small thing. It challenges pride. It challenges toughness. It challenges image. For a player like Carter, whose entire professional identity is built around dominance, being turned into somebody else's punchline was never going to sit quietly. The moment fans started attaching jokes to his name, the clock started ticking. Deen may have won the first clip, but Carter had a much bigger stage. When two internet worlds collided, what made this story explode was not just the confrontation itself. It was the collision of two completely different audiences. Deen belonged to the streaming world, where chaos is content and confrontation is treated like entertainment. Carter belonged to the NFL world, where reputation, discipline, and public image are constantly under a microscope. For streaming fans, the moment was another wild street encounter. They judged it like a live clip, who looked calmer, who sounded sharper, who controlled the camera. But for football fans, the situation looked different. They saw a young defensive star being publicly tested by someone who did not seem to understand the weight of the person standing in front of him. That crossover gave the story oxygen. People who had never watched Deen suddenly searched his name. People who barely followed the Eagles suddenly learned about Carter's background. Sports accounts started covering streamer culture. Streaming audiences started discussing NFL personalities. One clip became a bridge between two online ecosystems that usually do not speak the same language. And once the story entered the NFL space, the tone changed. This was no longer just entertainment. It became part of a bigger conversation about Carter's temperament. Every past incident came back into the discussion. Every old clip, every fine, every headline about his intensity got pulled into the same frame. Suddenly, Deen was not just a streamer who found a famous target. He was the newest name in a long list of people who had tested Carter and discovered that Carter does not disappear quietly. That is the danger of provoking someone with a larger platform. The first clip might belong to the person holding the camera, but the aftermath belongs to the person with the bigger audience. And Carter had something Deen did not. An entire football world already invested in his story. So even before Carter said much, the internet began rewriting the narrative for him. Deen's explanation became a joke. Carter's reputation became the evidence. And the original question changed again. It was not, did Deen embarrass Jalen Carter anymore? It became, did Deen accidentally wake up the wrong NFL star? Deen's pattern finally caught up with him. The Jalen Carter encounter did not look strange when placed beside Deen's other viral moments. In fact, it looked like part of a pattern. Deen pushes. The other person warns him. Deen keeps pushing. Then the situation crosses a line, and suddenly the content is not under his control anymore. That is what makes his rise so risky. The same thing that makes people watch him is the same thing that keeps putting him in danger socially, professionally, and physically. He turns boundaries into entertainment. He treats someone else's patience like a timer. The only unknown is how long that timer lasts. Before Carter, there had already been other confrontations that made people question whether Deen's style was sustainable. Incidents involving physically imposing personalities and fighters became part of his online reputation. Each one reinforced the idea that Deen was not just unlucky. He was repeatedly walking into tense situations and betting that the camera would protect him. But cameras do not always protect people. Sometimes they only preserve the mistake. With Carter, the outcome was different because Carter did not need to respond physically to change the story. He had something more powerful in modern culture: public weight. His name carried enough force that once fans understood who Deen had confronted, the entire internet reevaluated the clip. The same moment that looked like Deen being fearless suddenly looked like Deen being unaware. That is a brutal shift for a streamer. Viral power depends on framing. If the audience believes you controlled the moment, you win. But if the audience believes you misunderstood the room, the same clip turns against you. Deen's "I thought he was a Fed" explanation may have been honest, funny, or defensive, depending on who was listening. But either way, it gave critics the easiest angle possible. He did not know who he was talking to. And against someone like Jalen Carter, ignorance is not a shield. It is the reason the story became bigger. Carter did not need to chase the moment. The most interesting part of Jalen Carter's position is that he did not have to chase Deen for attention. He already had attention. He had the Eagles spotlight. He had national broadcasts. He had reporters, fans, analysts, and social media accounts watching his every move. That made his power in the situation completely different. Deen needed the confrontation to become content. Carter only needed to refuse the version of the story being told about him. That difference matters. When a streamer creates a viral moment, the goal is usually to own the first reaction. But public figures often control the second wave. They can step back in after everyone has formed an opinion and force the conversation to move. Carter's reputation made that even easier. Fans already believed he was the kind of player who responds directly. So the expectation became part of the suspense. Would he laugh it off? Would he fire back? Would he address Deen publicly? Would he let the internet know the clip did not represent the full reality? That suspense carried the story beyond the original video. It gave sports pages a reason to keep posting. It gave fans a reason to debate. It gave Deen's explanation more life than it probably deserved. And it placed Carter back at the center, not as a silent target, but as the person everyone was waiting to hear from. That is the part Deen may not have calculated. When you provoke someone with a bigger stage, you may create the first scene, but they can create the final act. And Carter's stage was built long before this clip. He earned it through football, through dominance, through controversy, through being impossible to ignore. So the more people talked about Deen, the more they talked about Carter. The more they joked about the encounter, the more they revisited Carter's career. The more they questioned the clip, the more they reminded everyone that Jalen Carter is not just a random man on a sidewalk. He is a star defensive tackle whose entire public image is built around pressure, pride, and response. The Eagles star under a bigger microscope. For Carter, the timing of the viral moment was not harmless. He was already under a microscope. Every intense player in the NFL gets watched, but Carter gets watched with a different kind of suspicion because people already expect sparks around him. That means even a non-football confrontation can become part of his football narrative. That is not always fair, but it is real. When a player has a reputation, every new moment gets attached to the old ones. One clip becomes another example. One response becomes another headline. One argument becomes evidence in a debate that started long before the current incident. This is the difficult space Carter lives in. His intensity helps make him great. The same fire that lets him dominate offensive linemen also makes people wonder whether he can keep control when emotions rise. Coaches love edge until edge becomes a distraction. Fans love passion until passion becomes a question. Media outlets love personality until personality becomes controversy. That is why the Deen situation landed with so much force. It was not just about a streamer. It was about whether Carter could avoid being dragged into another public storm. Some fans believed he had every right to defend himself. Others believed he should have ignored Deen completely. Both sides had a point, and that is what kept the debate alive. But one thing was clear. Carter's football value was not going anywhere. The Eagles know what he brings. Opposing teams know what he can ruin. Quarterbacks know how quickly he can change a play. A viral encounter does not erase his talent, his production, or his place in Philadelphia's defensive identity. Still, it adds another layer. Carter is becoming one of those athletes whose career is watched in two lanes at once. What he does on Sundays, and what happens when the cameras catch him outside the lines. That dual story is powerful. It is also dangerous. Why the internet reframed the whole clip. At first, the clip looked like Deen's moment. That is how viral culture works. The person with the camera usually controls the opening frame. Viewers see what the clip shows, react instantly, and decide who looks stronger before they know the full background. But once Carter's identity became central, the internet started rewatching the same clip with different eyes. Suddenly, people were not only watching Deen's behavior, they were studying Carter's reaction. They were asking whether Deen knew the risk. They were laughing at the Fed explanation. They were comparing the moment to Deen's previous confrontations and Carter's previous incidents. That is when the clip stopped being simple. The internet loves a reversal. It loves when the person who appears to win at first becomes the person who misread the room. Deen's confidence, which initially looked bold, started looking careless. Carter's silence or restraint, depending on the viewer, started looking more strategic. The same footage produced a different story because the context changed. That is the power of reputation. Carter did not need a dramatic speech for fans to fill in the blanks. His history did it for him. People already understood the type of emotional temperature he brings. They already knew he does not like being challenged. They already knew his name carries weight inside football culture. So even without a major public escalation, the perception moved in his direction. Deen, on the other hand, faced a harder problem. His content depends on looking fearless, sharp, and in control. But admitting he thought Carter was a fed made him look like he had not controlled the situation at all. It made him look uninformed. And online, being uninformed is often more damaging than being wrong. That is why this encounter became bigger than one sidewalk clip. It became a story about power. Not just physical power, but platform power, reputation power, and narrative power. Deen had the camera first. Carter had the bigger shadow. The lesson behind the viral firestorm. By the time the story settled into the wider NFL conversation, both men had been exposed in different ways. Deen was exposed as a streamer whose content strategy depends on pushing people close to the edge. Carter was exposed again as a star whose name can turn any tense moment into a national debate. Neither side walked away untouched. For Deen, the lesson is simple but uncomfortable. Confrontation content can build a following, but it also creates a trail. Every tense encounter becomes part of a pattern. Every person pushed too far becomes another warning sign. At some point, audiences stop seeing each clip as random and start seeing a strategy that keeps producing the same problem. For Carter, the lesson is more complicated. He is already respected as a monster on the defensive line. His talent is not in question, but the bigger his profile becomes, the less freedom he has to react like an ordinary person. When you are an NFL star, even a street encounter can become evidence in a national conversation about your character. That is the burden of fame. The camera does not care whether you were provoked. It only cares that you reacted. And that is what makes this story so gripping. It is not only about Deen the Great. It is not only about Jalen Carter. It is about what happens when modern fame, live stream culture, athletic pride, and public reputation collide in real time. Deen went looking for content. As Carter became the content. Then the internet took control and turned the whole thing into something larger than either man probably expected. In the end, Deen may have started the moment, but Carter's name gave it power. That is why this clip did not disappear like 100 other street encounters. It had an NFL star at the center, a reputation already burning hot, and a streamer whose style finally ran into someone with enough public weight to flip the entire script. And now, the real question is not whether this story is over. It is whether either man learned anything before the next camera starts rolling. The real cost of turning respect into content. The Jalen Carter and Deen the Great situation is not just another viral argument that disappears after a few days. It is a warning about what happens when attention becomes more important than awareness, and when public pride meets a camera that never blinks. Strategically, Deen understood one thing very well. Conflict travels fast. He knows viewers stop scrolling when they sense tension. He knows a bold approach, an uncomfortable question, or one disrespectful moment can create the kind of clip people repost before they even understand the full story. That is why his style works. It is simple, sharp, and built for reaction. But the weakness in that strategy is just as obvious. When your content depends on provoking strangers, you cannot always predict who is standing in front of you. You cannot measure someone's patience through a screen. You cannot assume every person will protect your content by staying calm. And when the person you confront turns out to be a high-profile NFL star with a powerful reputation, the entire game changes. For Jalen Carter, the lesson is different. He did not ask to become part of Deen's content, but once the camera found him, the world judged his image all over again. That is the reality for professional athletes now. The game is not only played in stadiums, it follows them into streets, airports, restaurants, and private moments that suddenly become public. One reaction can become a headline. One tense exchange can reopen old debates. One viral clip can make millions of people think they know the whole truth. That is why restraint matters. Not because disrespect is acceptable, and not because public figures should be treated like targets. Restraint matters because the internet rarely rewards the full story. It rewards the loudest piece of it. The smarter move, for both sides, is understanding the power of distance. Deen does not need to turn every person into a challenge. Carter does not need to let every challenge pull him into a new storm. Respect is not weakness. Walking away is not losing. Sometimes the strongest response is refusing to give a reckless moment more oxygen. And for fans, there is a lesson too. Viral clips are not always truth. They are fragments. They are angles. They are moments without the full room, the full tone, or the full history. Before turning someone into a hero or a villain, it is worth asking what happened before the camera started and what the clip leaves out. In the end, Deen got attention. Carter reminded everyone why his name carries weight, but the bigger message is clear. When fame, ego, and content culture collide, Nobody controls the fallout completely. So maybe the real victory is not embarrassing someone. Maybe it is knowing when not to escalate. Maybe it is choosing peace before pride turns into another headline. And maybe, in a world where everyone is filming, the most powerful move is still basic respect. If you made it this far, hit subscribe for more NFL stories, share this video with someone who follows football drama, and tap like if you want more deep breakdowns like this. Comment 1 if you think Deen crossed the line. Comment 2 if you think Carter should ignore moments like this and focus only on football.